Captain Jake Morrison stood at the big window of his spaceship and looked out at the stars. But today, something was different, because there was another ship out there that did not belong to humans, and it was huge and beautiful and scary all at the same time. The alien ship looked like a giant crystal church floating in space with lights that moved and danced across its surface in ways that hurt his eyes to look at for too long. Jake had been a space captain for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this before, and his heart was beating fast, because today was the day that humans would meet aliens for the first time in history. His ship was called the UES Discovery, and it was one of the best ships that Earth had ever built, but next to the alien vessel, it looked like a tiny toy. Jake turned away from the window and looked at his crew, who were all working hard at their stations and trying to act normal, but he could see that they were nervous too, because their hands were shaking a little, and they kept checking their equipment. Over and over again, Lisa Parker was sitting at the communications desk, and her fingers were moving quickly over the glowing buttons and screens as she tried to make sure everything would work perfectly when they talked to the aliens. She was young and smart, and Jake trusted her to do her job well. But today, even she looked worried as she checked and double-checked all the systems. Kevin Walsh was standing nearby with a small device in his hands that looked like a tablet. Computer, but it was much more important than that, because it was supposed to translate human words into alien language and alien words into human language. Kevin was a thin man with thick glasses who knew more about languages than anyone else on the ship, and he had been working for months to prepare this translator device for first contact. Jake walked over to Kevin and asked him if the translator was ready to work, and Kevin nodded his head, but Jake could see sweat on his forehead, even though the ship was not hot. Kevin explained that the device had studied all the signals and sounds that the aliens had sent to Earth, and it had figured out the mathematical patterns in their language and how their words were put together. He said the translator should be able to handle basic conversations and formal greetings between diplomats. The alien ship had sent a message asking if they could dock their ships together, and Jake had said yes, because that was why they had come all this way from Earth. The plan was for a small group of humans to go aboard the alien ship and meet their leaders and try to start peaceful relations between the two species. Jake had been chosen to lead this mission because he was calm under pressure and good at talking to people and making them feel comfortable. Commander Amy Rodriguez was the person who would do most of the talking because she was trained in diplomacy and knew all the right words to say to avoid making people angry. She was standing next to Jake now and going over her notes one more time to make sure she remembered all the important points about human culture and values that she was supposed to share with the aliens. The docking took several hours because the alien ship was so different from human ships that the two vessels had trouble connecting properly, but finally they managed to lock together and the airlock doors opened. Jake put on his best uniform and made sure his hair was neat and his shoes were clean, because first impressions were very important, and he wanted the aliens to think that humans were civilized and respectful. When the airlock opened, Jake and his team stepped into the alien ship and immediately knew they were somewhere completely different from anything humans had ever built. The hallways were enormous and stretched up so high that Jake could not see the ceiling, and the walls were covered with crystals that glowed with soft-colored light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The floor felt strange under their feet, like it was alive and responding to their footsteps. The aliens who came to meet them were tall and graceful and had purple and blue skin that changed colors as they moved. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and they walked in a flowing way that reminded Jake of dancers. The aliens did not speak out loud, but instead moved their hands in complex patterns that seemed to be their way of communicating with each other. Without words, Dr. Walsh whispered to Jake that according to his research, the alien society was ruled by women, and their queen had complete power over all decisions. He said it was very important to show proper respect to the queen, or she might decide that humans were enemies instead of friends. Jake nodded and tried to remember all the things he had been taught about diplomatic protocol and how to behave when meeting foreign leaders. The aliens led them through corridors that seemed to go on forever and past rooms filled with strange machines and equipment that hummed and glowed with mysterious energy. Everything was beautiful, but also alien and uncomfortable because human eyes and brains were not designed to understand architecture that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions at once. Finally, they arrived at the throne room, which was the most amazing and terrifying place Jake had ever seen. The room was huge and filled with geometric patterns that made his head hurt to look at, and at the center was a throne made of what looked like solid starlight. Sitting on the throne was the alien queen. She was 12 feet tall and magnificent, with a crown made of crystal that caught light and threw it around the room in rainbow patterns. She had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows on her long face, and when she looked at the humans, Jake felt like she could see right through him and read all his thoughts. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was power in it that made Jake want to bow down immediately. Jake stepped forward and activated his translator device and prepared to give the greeting that Earth's best diplomats had written for this historic moment. Jake took a deep breath and bowed low to show respect to the queen, just like he had practiced many times on the ship during the long journey from Earth. He held the translator device in his hand and spoke clearly and slowly so the machine would have the best chance of understanding his words and converting them correctly into the alien language. The words he spoke were carefully chosen by Earth's smartest diplomats and language experts, and they were meant to show that humans came in peace and wanted to be friends with the alien civilization. Jake said that he brought greetings from all of humanity and that Earth wanted to establish good relations and learn from each other and work together for the benefit of both species. The translator device made a soft humming sound, and the little blue light on its surface started blinking as it processed Jake's words and tried to convert them into the proper alien language. Everyone in the throne room waited quietly for the device to finish its work and produce the translated greeting that would begin the first conversation between humans and aliens. But something went wrong with the translation, because instead of the respectful and polite words that Jake had spoken, the device made a series of harsh, ugly sounds that echoed through the crystal throne room like nails scratching on metal. Then it made a noise that sounded like a very rude bodily function that would be embarrassing even among humans and completely inappropriate in front of royalty. The queen's 6 eyes opened wide in shock, and her 4 arms began moving rapidly in what was obviously the alien equivalent of angry gestures. All the alien courtiers in the room gasped at the same time, and the sound they made was like hundreds of crystal glasses breaking all at once. The beautiful crystal walls started glowing with a harsh red light that made the geometric patterns look threatening and dangerous. Dr. Walsh looked down at his tablet, and his face went completely white as he read the feedback from the translator device. His hands were shaking as he tried to understand what had gone wrong with the carefully programmed translation algorithms. He started muttering to himself and tapping frantically on his screen, trying to figure out why the device had failed so badly at such a critical moment. Commander Rodriguez leaned over to Walsh and whispered, urgently asking what the translator had actually said to the queen instead of the polite greeting that Jake had intended. Walsh looked like he was going to be sick as he read the translation feedback and realized the magnitude of the disaster that had just occurred. According to the device's internal logs, the translator had somehow converted Jake's respectful diplomatic greeting into something that roughly meant that humans were inferior creatures who lived in mud and had come to steal the queen's crown and challenge her to a fight while making disgusting noises at her sacred crystals. The translation had also somehow managed to suggest that humans thought the queen species was only good for cleaning toilets. Jake's mouth fell open in horror as he realized that, instead of starting peaceful relations with an advanced alien civilization, he had just delivered what was probably the most insulting message possible to their most powerful leader. The cultural context files that Dr. Walsh had spent months preparing had somehow been completely corrupted or misunderstood by the translation software. The queen stood up from her throne, and her crystal crown began glowing so brightly that it cast harsh shadows all around the impossible architecture of the room. When she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone who was deeply offended and very angry, even though the humans could not understand her words without translation. The alien guards, who had been standing quietly at attention, suddenly moved closer to the human delegation, and their graceful, dancing movements had changed into something that looked much more threatening and military. The humans were now surrounded by tall alien beings who looked ready to take action against the visitors who had just insulted their queen. Lisa Parker's communication device started making urgent beeping sounds as messages came in from the Discovery, warning that the alien ship's weapons were powering up and targeting the human vessel. The situation had gone from peaceful first contact to potential interstellar warfare in less than 30 seconds because of a malfunctioning translator. Dr. Walsh was working desperately on his tablet, trying to find the source of the translation error, while sweat poured down his face. He discovered that somehow the cultural context matrix in the translation software had been completely inverted, so that everything the humans thought was polite and alien language was actually deeply offensive, and everything they thought was rude was actually respectful. The queen spoke again, and even without translation, her tone made it clear that she was giving the humans some kind of ultimatum or final warning. The crystal crown on her head was now pulsing with angry red light, and the walls of the throne room were vibrating with a low, threatening sound that seemed to come from the very structure of the alien ship. Jake realized that he had perhaps 30 seconds to find a way to explain the misunderstanding before the queen decided that humans were enemies who deserved to be destroyed. The weight of 2 entire civilizations and the future of interstellar relations rested on his ability to somehow communicate that the insults had been accidental and not intentional. Commander Rodriguez stepped forward with an idea, because she had noticed that the aliens used complex hand gestures to communicate with each other even when they were speaking out loud. Maybe they could use physical gestures to bridge the communication gap where technology had failed so catastrophically. The translator device was clearly broken and could not be trusted to convey their true intentions, so they would have to find another way to show the queen that humans had come in peace and that the terrible insults had been the result of technological failure rather than deliberate disrespect. Jake raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace, while Dr. Walsh continued working frantically to repair the translation software before the situation escalated into violence that would doom any chance of peaceful relations between humans and aliens. Jake kept his hands raised high in the air, hoping that the gesture would be understood as peaceful by the alien queen, while Dr. Walsh worked frantically on his translator device, trying to fix whatever had gone wrong with the software. The queen's crystal crown was still pulsing with angry red light, and the walls of the throne room continued to vibrate with that low, threatening sound that made the humans feel like they were standing inside a giant, angry machine. Jake spoke slowly and carefully, telling the queen that there had been a terrible misunderstanding and that his words had been changed by broken technology, but the translator device just made more strange noises that probably made the situation even worse. Dr. Walsh looked up from his tablet with panic in his eyes and shook his head to indicate that the device was still not working properly. Commander Rodriguez had been watching the alien courtiers carefully, and she noticed that they used their 4 arms to make flowing, graceful movements that seemed to convey meaning, even when they were not making sounds with their voices. She stepped forward and began copying the hand gestures she had observed during their walk through the ship, trying to communicate through movement instead of words. She pointed to the translator device and then made motions with her hands that she hoped would indicate that the machine was broken or malfunctioning. Then she put her hands together and bowed her head in what she hoped was a universal gesture of apology and respect. The alien guards were still surrounding them, but they seemed slightly less threatening as they watched the human woman trying to communicate in their silent language. The Queen's 6 eyes focused on Rodriguez's hand movements, and her posture shifted slightly, as if she was considering whether the humans might actually be telling the truth about their technological failure. The red glow from her crown dimmed just a little bit, which gave the humans hope that maybe they could still salvage this diplomatic disaster. Walsh finally found the source of the problem in his translation software and discovered that the cultural context matrix had somehow been completely reversed during the final pre-mission updates. Every phrase and gesture that his team thought was polite in alien culture was actually the equivalent of the worst possible insults, and every expression they thought was rude was actually a sign of deep respect. Lisa Parker had an inspiration and pulled out her personal tablet, which contained thousands of pictures and videos from Earth that she had brought along to share with her family. When she returned home, she approached the Queen carefully and began showing her images of human cities and families and children playing in parks and going to school. She pointed to herself and the other humans and then to the pictures, trying to show that humans were peaceful people who lived in communities and took care of their children and built beautiful things. The alien courtiers began making soft chiming sounds as they looked at the images of Earth and human civilization with what appeared to be curiosity and interest rather than anger. The Queen leaned forward on her throne to get a better look at the tablet screen, and her crown shifted from angry red to a cooler blue color as she examined pictures of human families gathering for meals and children learning to read and scientists working together in laboratories. The threatening vibration in the walls gradually faded away as the tension in the room began to ease. Dr. Walsh managed to correct the translation matrix and ran a quick test to make sure the cultural context was now properly aligned with what they had learned about alien language and customs. He looked up at Jake and nodded to indicate that the device should now translate their actual words instead of converting them into horrible insults. The Queen spoke again, and this time her tone was less angry and more curious, as if she was genuinely interested in hearing what the humans had to say for themselves. Dr. Walsh activated his newly corrected translator and was relieved to hear the device produce the melodic harmonic sounds that indicated proper alien language instead of the harsh noises it had made before. The translation came through clearly, as the Queen said that she was willing to listen to their explanation, but that she wanted to know why humans would send representatives who would deliberately insult her in such a creative and offensive manner. She was particularly upset about the comments regarding her crown, which was apparently a sacred relic that had been passed down through many generations of alien royalty. Jake realized that this was the crucial moment that would determine whether humanity's first contact with aliens would end in friendship or warfare. Everything depended on his ability to explain what had really happened and convince the Queen that the insults had been accidental rather than intentional. The future of both civilizations hung in the balance as he prepared to speak again. Commander. Rodriguez continued making respectful gestures with her hands while Lisa Parker showed more images of human culture and achievements, trying to demonstrate that humans were an advanced and peaceful species that valued art and learning and cooperation. The alien courtiers seemed fascinated by the pictures and began making those soft chiming sounds more frequently. Dr. Walsh double and triple checked his translator device to make absolutely certain that it would now convey their true intentions instead of converting them into offensive garbage. He had learned more about alien linguistics in the past few minutes than in months of preparation, and he was determined not to let technology fail them again. The Queen's crown had now shifted to a warm golden color, and the geometric patterns on the walls had stopped their threatening display and returned to the gentle pulsing light that had seemed beautiful rather than scary when the humans first entered the throne room. The immediate danger of violence seemed to have passed, but they still needed to repair the damage that had been done to diplomatic relations. Jake took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the real greeting that he had intended to give when they first met the Queen, hoping that this time the words would be translated correctly and begin the process of building trust between their two species. Walsh finished checking his translator device one final time, and his hands had stopped shaking as he confirmed that the cultural context matrix was now properly calibrated to convert human words into respectful alien language instead of terrible insults. Jake stood up straight and approached the Queen again, but this time he had Commander Rodriguez beside him to provide backup communication through hand gestures in case the technology failed them again. The Queen watched them with her 6 eyes as they came closer to her throne, and her crystal crown was now glowing with soft blue light, instead of the angry red that had filled the room with such menace just a few minutes before. The alien courtiers had also relaxed and were no longer making the harsh sounds that indicated shock and outrage at the supposed insults. Jake spoke carefully and slowly, telling the Queen that he needed to confess that their technology had failed them in the worst possible way, and that the words she had heard were not human words, but the confused nonsense of a broken machine that had completely misunderstood her beautiful language. The translator device hummed softly and produced the melodic harmonic tones that Dr. Walsh had identified as proper. Respectful communication in alien culture. The Queen's posture shifted as she heard the correctly translated words, and her crown dimmed to an even softer blue glow as she considered what Jake had told her. The threatening vibration in the crystal walls had completely stopped, and the geometric patterns had returned to their gentle pulsing rhythm that made the throne room feel magical rather than dangerous. Commander Rodriguez stepped forward and used the hand gestures she had been learning by watching the aliens to try to convey the concept of technological failure and sincere apology. She moved her 4 limbs in flowing patterns that she hoped would show respect and regret for the misunderstanding that had nearly caused a diplomatic catastrophe between their two species. The Queen and her courtiers watched Rodriguez's attempts at their silent language with apparent interest, and some of them began making soft chiming sounds that the humans had learned indicated pleasure or approval. The Queen's 6 eyes followed every movement as the human woman tried to communicate in the alien way of hand signals and body language. Lisa Parker was still holding her tablet with pictures of Earth and human families as she stepped forward to ask if she could show the Queen more about human culture and values. The Queen gestured for her to approach the throne, and Lisa began displaying images of human diplomatic meetings where world leaders bowed to each other and shook hands and engaged in respectful conversation. She showed pictures of human children learning to say please and thank you, and families gathered together for peaceful meals and celebrations. Lisa explained that this was how humans truly behaved when they met other people, and that they taught their children from a very young age to be respectful and kind to others, especially to leaders and people in positions of authority. The Queen leaned forward to examine the images more closely, and her crown shifted to a warm golden color as she saw how human families interacted with love and care for each other. She seemed particularly interested in pictures of human children learning and playing together, regardless of their different skin colors and backgrounds. Dr. Walsh gained confidence as his translator continued to work properly and he added that, in human culture, it would be considered deeply shameful and disrespectful to insult a ruler or mock their ceremonial regalia. He explained that humans had many expressions in their language about the importance of diplomacy and respect when meeting foreign leaders and dignitaries. The Queen considered everything she was hearing and seeing from the humans and the alien. Courtiers seemed less agitated as they listened to the translated explanations and watched Lisa's pictures of human civilization. The crystal walls had returned to their beautiful, gentle glow, and the throne room once again felt like a place of wonder rather than a place of potential violence. After several minutes of careful consideration, the Queen spoke again, and her translated words carried a tone of cautious curiosity rather than anger or suspicion. She said that the humans claimed their speaking device had betrayed their true intentions, but that she needed to know how they could be certain this was not simply an elaborate deception to avoid the consequences of deliberate insults. Jake understood that this was still a critical moment in the diplomatic process, because the Queen had every right to be suspicious of their explanation given how offensive the mistranslated words had been. He needed to prove that humans were genuinely peaceful and respectful people who had been victims of technological failure, rather than aggressive aliens who had come to cause trouble. Lisa Parker had been quietly observing the alien courtiers, and she noticed that they seemed fascinated by images of human art and music and scientific achievements. She began showing pictures of human orchestras playing beautiful music and artists creating sculptures and paintings, and scientists working together to solve complex problems and help their fellow humans. The Queen watched these images with growing interest, and her crown continued to glow with warm golden light as she saw evidence of human creativity and cooperation and peaceful achievement. The alien courtiers were making more frequent chiming sounds that indicated approval and pleasure as they saw how humans had built beautiful cities and created wonderful art and music. Dr. Walsh asked the Queen if she would like to hear how they had actually intended to greet her when they first met, and she nodded her long, elegant head to indicate that she was willing to listen to their true words. Jake straightened his uniform and prepared to deliver the real diplomatic greeting that Earth's best minds had crafted for this historic first meeting between humans and aliens. The moment had arrived when Jake could finally speak the words that were meant to begin a friendship between two civilizations, and he hoped that this time the technology would faithfully convey his genuine respect and admiration for the Queen and her people. Jake stood tall and spoke with all the dignity and respect he could gather in his voice as he delivered the greeting that had been carefully crafted by Earth's finest diplomats and language experts. He told the Queen that she was radiant and magnificent, and that humans were honored beyond measure to stand in her presence and meet her great civilization. He said that they had come as representatives of all humanity, seeking to learn from her wisdom and to offer their friendship to her people. The translator device produced flowing, harmonious tones that seemed to make the very air in the throne room sparkle with musical light, and the Queen's expression transformed completely from suspicious ruler to gracious host. Her crystal crown shifted to brilliant golden radiance that spread throughout the impossible architecture of the chamber and made everything seem warm and welcoming instead of alien and threatening. Queen smiled for the first time since the humans had arrived, and when she did, her crystalline teeth caught the light and threw it around the room in beautiful rainbow patterns that danced across the geometric walls. Her 6 eyes sparkled with pleasure as she heard the words that Jake had truly intended to speak, and the alien courtiers began making harmonious sounds that Dr. Walsh's translator identified as enthusiastic applause. The Queen spoke, and her translated words carried notes of genuine approval and welcome, as she said that these were words worthy of a species that had learned to travel between the stars, and that she accepted their friendship and welcomed them to the crystal realm. The tension that had filled the throne room for those terrifying minutes had finally dissolved completely and been replaced by an atmosphere of curiosity and mutual respect. Commander Rodriguez stepped forward with a small wrapped package that the human delegation had brought from Earth as gifts to represent their culture and values. She explained that they had brought tokens of respect and friendship that they hoped might serve as the beginning of cultural exchange between their two very different but equally fascinating civilizations. The Queen accepted the package with two of her 4 graceful hands and unwrapped it with delicate care that showed she understood the symbolic importance of the gesture. Inside were items that represented the best of human achievement and creativity, including a small crystal prism from Earth that created rainbow patterns when held to light and photographs of Earth's most beautiful natural wonders. There was also a recording device containing music from many different human cultures, including classical pieces by great composers and folk songs from various countries around the world. The Queen held up the Earth crystal and watched in fascination as it split the throne room's mystical light into brilliant rainbow patterns that danced across her crown and made her seem even more magnificent than before. She activated the music recording device, and the throne room filled with the gentle notes of a Mozart piano concerto that seemed to blend perfectly with the harmonic frequencies of the alien architecture. The aliens listened with obvious pleasure, and their skin colors began shifting through beautiful patterns that seemed to match the rhythm and melody of the human music. The Queen observed that humans created harmony from sound waves and mathematical relationships, and that this suggested a sophisticated understanding of beauty and universal principles that transcended species differences. She said that her people would very much like to hear more human music and share their own musical traditions with their new friends from Earth.dr. Walsh felt confident enough to ask the Queen what their broken translator device had actually said to her initially, because he wanted to understand exactly how badly their technology had failed them and make sure such a disaster never happened again. The Queen's crystalline teeth sparkled as she laughed, and the sound was like silver bells ringing in a gentle summer breeze. She explained that the malfunctioning machine had told them that humans were stink-footed dirt-eaters who had come to steal her sparkly hat crystals and challenge her to combat while making rude mouth noises at her sacred light stones. She said the exact phrasing had been quite creatively offensive, and that several of her courtiers had actually been impressed by the linguistic artistry, even though they had wanted to vaporize the humans immediately afterward. Jake buried his face in his hands as he realized just how embarrassing their first words on alien civilization had been. But Lisa Parker could not help laughing as she asked if their greeting had basically been equivalent to saying that the Queen's hat was stupid and they wanted to fight her. Dr. Walsh confirmed that the translator had also managed to imply that humans reproduced by rolling around in mud and considered the Queen's sacred crystals suitable for bathroom decoration. The entire human delegation found themselves alternating between mortification and helpless laughter at the absurdity of the situation, and even the alien courtiers seemed to be enjoying the humor as their skin patterns became brighter and more animated. The Queen raised one of her 4 hands for attention and explained that while the translated words had been deeply offensive, their actions had told a completely different story. She said that they had bowed with respect and brought gifts and shown images of their families and children, and that their body language had spoken of peace even when their machine had spoken of war. This was why she had chosen to listen rather than simply destroy their ship and end the first contact attempt in violence and tragedy. Jake asked how they could make amends for such a terrible first impression, and the Queen considered the question, while looking at each human in turn with her 6 intelligent eyes. She said they could start by teaching her people more about human civilization, because they found humans fascinating for being able to create beautiful art and music, while also building machines that could insult royalty with such spectacular creativity that it bordered on performance art. Commander Rodriguez grinned and said that she thought this might be the beginning of a very interesting friendship between their species and the Puan. Queen agreed, but suggested that next time they visit, they should bring a backup translator device, and maybe test it on something less important than royal greetings first. Years later, when human-alien relations had grown into a strong alliance that benefited both civilizations' diplomats from both species, would still share the story of the translator malfunction as an example of how genuine respect and good intentions could overcome even the most spectacular communication failures and turn potential enemies into lasting friends.